The world as we know it is still dealing with the tragic aftershocks of what happened in Afghanistan in August 2021. Nainima Basu's delightful book, The Fall of Kabul, chronicles the collapse of the Republic of Afghanistan and the subsequent takeover of this beleaguered, war-torn country by the Taliban. Nainima, what is it about Afghanistan that makes it the world's most favorite battlefield?
Well, thank you so much for that, Sumit, and it's an honor to be with you on the panel. And thank you, Bangalore Lit Fest. So, I wrote this book thinking about the fact that when I was there, I saw so many stories unfolding in front of my eyes, not all of which I could write as a journalist at that point of time. Because you need to write your reportage within a certain narrative, but I thought the world would need to know, and they should know what really who the Afghans are. And why I say Afghanistan is the world's most favorite battlefield is because if you really read history from the Great Game, the how things unfolded since 17th, 18th century, the Anglo-Afghan War, how the Russians look at Afghanistan, even now, everybody has sort of want a stake in that country. And I think over the years that have also made Afghans very smart in the sense that they know how to deal with this, war-hungry people who probably have nowhere to go but land up in Afghanistan to do something and say that, okay, this is the land of terrorists, let's just go and change the government. But we know what has really happened now. This is the very same US that came in to throw the Taliban out, handed the country back to them in all glory and spirit, signing a so-called peace deal. So, all that was very fascinating to me in the sense that this is right being played out in your neighborhood. If you really don't go now, you can never go and justify yourself to be a journalist. It's all very good to show the war, the bullets, the bombs all the time, but there are several stories that are there that needs to be told through the common man's eye.
Nainima, in July of 2021, the news that India was going to temporarily shut down its consulate in Kandahar, that was really what piqued your curiosity. That told you that something was going on in Afghanistan.
Yes, I mean, India started to shut down its consulate from the COVID times first, Herat, Jalalabad. That time they said it was because of COVID, and I was reading certain articles if it was really COVID, and at that time I read a couple of articles by Mr. Anand Arni, and I realized that not really everything is COVID really. So let's just see what's happening. And I was covering Afghanistan, sitting in Delhi. And then we were reading New York Times, Washington Post, and everybody was telling us everything is good in Kabul, You don't need to worry, there will be a peace deal. In Doha, things are all good. So, the Taliban can never come back. The US will stitch up something. The US will never leave. So all that. And then eventually the Kandahar consulate also we had shut down. And the Minister of External Affairs at that time said it's a temporary thing. It's still sort of shut down. And then when I was there, they shut down even Mazar-e-Sharif. But yeah, the Kandahar shutdown was something that I thought things are really serious. It's not really COVID. It is COVID plus Taliban. So, something is happening. And by then, Taliban had really claimed a lot of provinces. The way they were, speeding up, although they were doing a peace deal also in Doha, this is what on the ground things were completely different. So I thought this is time for me to really go there if I can. And I sort of convinced my editor after a lot of struggle, and he said that, okay, if you can go, you go, but don't start, after landing there, don't start crying and come back. So I said, no, I would really love to go there and see what is happening, tell the world what I am seeing, and not tell the world rehashing the stories of New York Times. I refuse to do that.
You realized that the region was on the brink of a pivotal moment. You decided to go to Afghanistan at this time. There's a reaction from your editor, your colleagues. How did your family react to this decision that you wanted to go to Afghanistan to report from on the ground?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Nobody asks about the family, which is always your support in whichever decision that you take. I guess fortunately for me, I have a husband who's also a war photographer, and he'd gone to Afghanistan. So he said that no matter what the world tells you, just go there and do your stories. I know you'll come back with hundreds of stories to tell. And of course, I have a mother who's always told me that nothing should stop you just because you're a woman. And I'm not saying that for the sake of it. I've seen how she sort of single-handedly brought me and my brother up while my father used to be away doing his job. He had a traveling job. So yeah, and the best encouragement I got was from my son, who was 8 years old at that time. He said, "I want to see you on TV." I said, "Well, I will not be on TV, but surely when you grow up, you would read a book on Afghanistan, and you might tell the world at that time that my mother was a true journalist who wanted to state the facts to the world, which is so difficult these days, to tell people what is the truth on the ground rather than what you always see on social media, is the biggest challenge I think journalists face today. You can easily sit, open your laptop, go on Twitter and write everything that the leaders are telling you there. And it's another thing to go on the ground and understand, absorb yourself, smell the soil there, eat their food, and then understand. A couple of weeks back, I was there in China. People told me, "Oh, look at her, Jyoti Basu's granddaughter going to China." So it all happens with journalists. But then I think I'd also gone to Bangladesh when people were saying all Indian journalists will be attacked and mobbed and killed. So I was there in Dhaka and in nearby places, and I realized more you go on the ground is where the truth lies.
Now, one can prepare for a work assignment, a business trip. How does one prepare for the collapse of a republic? What kind of prep went in before you landed in Afghanistan? And in the book, you mentioned that you carried 4 rare books about Afghanistan with you. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I would request everyone to read the book to understand what really was the preparation. Frankly, it was nothing that's a spoiler. But then what? I really thought that I'll be seeing kind of the Soviet withdrawal that had happened in 1989, where the tanks will roll down Kabul roads and you'll see soldiers waving at Afghans and all that. Because my father used to get all those Life magazines and Time magazines, and I thought I will be part of that kind of a story when the NATO troops withdrawal will happen. But nobody really expected President Ghani to just run away, leaving the country like that. Americans will leave the country in such a chaos and run away. So I was not prepared for that. I just thought I'll be going there, positioning myself in the Serena Hotel and, go on the ground, talk to people. It was all very different. When I landed there, I realized, oh my goodness, the day I landed in Kabul on 8th of August, and, there was this Serena Hotel had sent a cab. That cab driver told me that, "Ab kyun aaye hai? Why have you come?" Because the Taliban is here. I said, "Really? I thought nothing is happening." So eventually you realize that the Taliban was very much inside. They were having their sleeper cells and doing their kind of things. It was just a matter of days for them to come out in the open and announce that, we are in control of the country. So that's what it is. So basically there were no preparations. And eventually when they came in, that's the time when I was told by my editor at that point of time to come back, and I really didn't want to come back. And I've written that in the book because the Taliban settled themselves in the Serena Hotel itself, and I wanted to talk to them, do interviews. The journalist in me is always there sniffing stories. So, but then yes, I got evacuated with the embassy, and that was another chapter that I've written in my book, how the embassy was preparing itself while they kept saying that there'll be some hope that, Afghanistan will not go back to the Taliban. So that's another story.
So, Nainima, even as the Taliban was overrunning the country, capturing provincial capitals, capturing cities, there was talk of a peace deal that was being negotiated in Doha, and there was talk that power sharing would happen as a result of that deal. So, who were the key players? What were the dynamics? Why do you think that never materialized?
Well, that's a very complex story, and there are several layers to it. It started since the time the US went in that country, and I think in the first 5 years of their war on terror, they realized that Taliban was not really their enemy. It was the Al Qaeda that they were looking at. Eventually, they got this Osama bin Laden killed, but then also they had been wanting to withdraw, but that time never really came when they will actually say we will withdraw. But uh, there was this time when President Karzai, when he was the president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, and Joe Biden was the vice president, during a dinner at that point of time in Kabul, Biden had told him that one day I will leave this country no matter what you say or do. And somehow President Karzai kept on hoping that the US will never leave that country. Anyway, those are part of history. But yeah, I mean, the Doha deal was going on. People thought that, oh, Americans are part of it, intra-Afghan dialogue is going on, so nothing will happen. But, things were completely different within Afghanistan at that point of time. And I think the talks failed because there was never really in it that the Taliban would see that what they were getting out of it. I think they were never ready for a power sharing deal. And it's also, the truth is that US wanted to leave the country anyhow, which is why they did the so-called peace deal with Taliban and left that country. So I think, and President Ghani at that point of time, Ashraf Ghani, he kept on telling his own people that the US will stay back and we will stay back. We are doing a deal. In fact, on 13th of August, 13th, 14th of August, he addressed the nation saying that everything is good, and the very next day he leaves. So that's Afghanistan for you. You always expect the unexpected, and you need to be ready with your pen and paper and your laptop to write the story. And within a story, there are also several stories which I wanted to write, which I couldn't write at that point of time, and all those stories are there in the book.
The Taliban are not exactly known across the world for their subtle diplomacy. And yet at Doha, you mentioned to me backstage that they had some polished negotiators who were very different from the people ruling back home. Tell us a little about that.
So you need to look at Taliban from several angles, right? If you know the history, there is a Taliban in Doha, there is a Taliban in Afghanistan. And within them, there is a Haqqani network. So there are a lot of tensions going on even at this point of time as we speak. However, I think the world really has failed to analyze and assess what this entity Taliban is. If you think we all know about Taliban, nobody can know about Taliban, as an expert. And the fact that, there is this... within Afghans, there is this feeling that they are also our brothers. And that's what I've written in one of those chapters when I went to Mazar-e-Sharif, and the Afghanistan embassy at that point of time was very upset with the story. And they wrote to my editor, what is she even writing there? Has she lost her mind? And because I had done a story talking to common people out there in the Mazar-e-Sharif marketplace, and, women and men, saying that let the Taliban come in. Why are Indian journalists getting so scared? So, I was wearing my bulletproof jacket and everything. They said, if you open all this, decorations that you have and sit with us and talk, we can open up. So then I realized that's also one lesson I learned, that, when you're doing ground reporting, you cannot do all this kind of, drama and all these things. I'll call it a drama because today I feel I shouldn't have done all that, but everybody kept on telling me you'll be shot at and this, that. So many people discouraged me before going. Oh, you want Indian journalism, the moment you land, ISI will kidnap you and they'll rape you and throw you in some corner. Nothing of that sort really happened. I'm sorry, it's not a fancy Bollywood movie going on. If you really go there, sit with the Afghans, talk to them, share a plate of kebab, sit with them and talk to them, they open up like anything, and they have so many stories to tell you. So I think that's what is very important to me.
Nainima, how was the Taliban able to so easily overrun the country? There was the Afghan army, and they had supposedly been trained by NATO and specifically the United States. So why did the Afghan army collapse like a pack of cards?
Well, to tell you frankly, there was no training that they got from NATO. Okay, the NATO was using the Afghan forces for their own benefit. And since 2013, when the withdrawal really started to, intensify, they left the country without training the soldiers adequately to fight the Taliban. So it's very another misconception for us to think that okay, the NATO made them another NATO kind of soldier. No, Afghan soldiers got all the style, how to wear the goggles, how to wear the helmets, and how to wear the take the gun in your hands like a typical Hollywood flick. But that's not it is. When they actually faced the Taliban, they could not fight the Taliban because they didn't have the wherewithal. I was there in Mazar-e-Sharif in the front line, and I met about 20 odd boys who were, poor chaps. They had got no leaves for last 3 years. They said they were not getting their salaries, yet they were fighting the Taliban. They were not getting any reinforcements, nothing at all. And later on, I got to, learn that all 20 of them got killed. But when they were talking to me, they said that we had so much hopes that we will be like another American soldier, but they gave us nothing in terms of training or how to face your enemy. And I think even the American soldiers were not aware how powerful the Taliban can be. There's also another story how the weaponry finally fell into the hands of Taliban and everything. But then the fact is they could get provinces after provinces also because some of the governors of those provinces also, sort of surrendered, and they said that they realized that the time is up and the Americans had no plan what to do. So we know what has finally happened.
I found it fascinating in your telling of the story that the average man on the street knew that Kabul was going to fall, that the Taliban would take over. But the elites in Kabul, the Western media agencies, governments, European governments, even the Indian government, seemed to be fairly oblivious to the fact that this was around the corner. What caused this huge disconnect? Because all of these governments and organizations have their machinery in place for intelligence.
Well, they do, but it depends how much groundwork they also do. I don't want to comment on the governments, but that is really the reason why I went there, because I realized something is amiss. Somebody is not telling the truth. If they are getting provinces after provinces at such a rapid pace, and we are telling that everything is good in Kabul, then you're fooling yourself even as a journalist. And Kabul, I'll tell you, is another place like Delhi. I come from Delhi, and I know how the elite talks to you all the time. They'll brainwash you in seconds, and you will feel, oh, everything is really good in this world. I mean, I don't want to sound so negative. We journalists tend to be all the time negative, but nothing was good in Afghanistan at that point of time. And there is this cohort of think tankers, journalists, and everybody there is there in Delhi and Kabul who were, talking to each other, saying everything was good when the truth was something completely different. So I realized that once, as I said, once I landed, and everybody was telling me that you should go back because, the Taliban is already here. So what is it that you are thinking you'll be covering? NATO withdrawal? NATO withdrawal has happened. It's just the last few soldiers who need to leave this country. That's about it. So the truth was completely different from what we were getting to hear sitting in Delhi. And talking about the government, the Indian government, I would not know what kind of inputs they were getting, but they had a lot of faith in President Ashraf Ghani, who was probably telling them, don't worry, I will, manage something. But when I went there and I got evacuated with the embassy on 16th of August, and I realized even our embassy was sort of, in some kind of world they were in, where in 15th of August, they celebrated Indian Independence Day. They sang Jan Gan Man while the Taliban was taking over Kabul. So I realized the disconnect there.
I'm going to ask Nainima 2 more questions and then hand her over to the audience. And just a heads up for you so that you can collect your thoughts and then you can raise your hands. I'm going to ask both questions at the same time so that you can answer them in succession. You landed an interview with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the butcher of Kabul. Tell us a story behind that. And tell this audience how someone like Shah Rukh Khan can be an unlikely lifesaver for an Indian journalist in Afghanistan.
Well, brilliant questions. Both were unexpected at that point of time. I'm a person, it's very odd, and I know people call me boring. I don't watch movies, I don't watch OTTs, and So I really, it never occurred to me even Shah Rukh Khan can help me, but that's what the person who came to pick me up from the airport, and while I was going towards my hotel in Serena, I was happily clicking photos and thinking of tweeting them, as we all journalists these days are asked to do. And then suddenly our car was stopped, and somebody, one of the Afghan policemen came and said that, told the driver, who is she? She must be, she looks like a Pakistani spy. I don't know why I look like a Pakistani spy, but somewhere I did maybe. So then, and the driver really got scared, and he said, "You just say Shah Rukh Khan, and he'll leave you." I said, "Okay, Shah Rukh Khan." He got so happy and all that, and he said, "Okay, you can go." I'm like, "Oh, really? This is the Bollywood magic you have. You don't have any other magic as Indians, just Shah Rukh Khan." So I'm like, "Okay." And then also in the airport that day, when people were watching scenes like Afghans falling from aircraft, which was so unfortunate. I saw about 30 odd boys getting killed just because they were running to the runway. I mean, I can't even express those in words. I've written all that in my book, but the Taliban was not letting people go out of the airport, neither they can come in. So it was a pretty messed up situation, and I was told by my embassy. First, they told me, go to the airport, catch the Air India flight, and come back. I did that, and then I realized there was no airport. I called them and I said, "Do you realize there is no airport?" The embassy guys told me, "Oh, is it? The airport is over?" I'm like, "Yes, the Air India flight is not landing." So they're saying, Nainima, you have this thing of dramatizing, you journalists. Air India is going to land today at 11, catch that flight. I mean, and that was 8 o'clock, and people were already dying in the airport. There were bullets, there was blood, dead bodies, and the Taliban, it was their first day of so called governance, so they thought, let's just shoot people, whatever the crowd there is. And it was so unfortunate, and I kept calling the embassy. I'm like, do you realize what is going on? I mean, I can't do a video call out here, so please understand what is going on. They said, okay, then do one thing, catch a cab and come to the embassy. I didn't even know how to catch a cab and do what at that point of time. Seriously, the Kabul was over by then. So anyway, so I was wanting to go out of the airport, and the Taliban was checking bags and everything. They looked at me, and they were like, with the question, "Who are you?" I just said Shah Rukh Khan. They said, "Okay, barabar, now you can walk." I'm like, okay, that magic worked for me. Magic, really, really magic twice, and I'm like, okay. And then also, in Mazar-e-Sharif, that night of 12th of August, I was sitting in the airport. My flight to Kabul got delayed, and somebody told me, and there was this rumor that they shut down the airport, locked it up, saying that the Taliban is coming. And within a day after that, Mazar really fell. And they said that, Taliban is going to come inside this airport and kill all of you. You'll never be able to catch the flight to Kabul. Well, thankfully that didn't happen, but I was sitting with few girls out there, Afghan girls, who were running away from Mazar, coming to Kabul, and they had plans to come to Delhi and get admission in Amity University and things like that. And they had so much hopes on India, but anyway, we never gave them any visa, because to India, I think at that time everybody looked like a Taliban. But so that there also one of the girls told me, my dream is to go to Delhi, get admission in this college, and I'll eventually go to Mumbai and meet Shah Rukh and Deepika Padukone. So I realized, okay, so if that is what is left of India, so be it. But yeah, coming to Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, I think that was also unexpected. I happened to meet one of their men in the Serena Hotel. So while chatting, and I thought, he's from ISI. So I approached and I said, "Are you from ISI?" He laughed. He said, "No, I'm with Mr. Hikmatyar." And I was like, "Do you know that I've read so much about him? Sorry to say, but I have this image of him as the butcher of Kabul." Again, for all the things that he's done, people need to read about him if you haven't, and I'm sure you have. But that's another name the Western media gave him for whatever reasons. But they said, "Why do you want to interview him?" So I said, "Well, as a journalist, I would interview anybody. So if I can get Mr. Hikmatyar to understand how he is seeing the present situation, it will be quite a this thing for me." So my editor at that time, I told him, he said, "Hikmatyar will never speak to you. He never gave interviews to any editors or this thing. He'll not talk to you." I said, "Let me just try." And the next day I get the call from the same man saying that he has agreed. So I said, and I didn't have a camera person with me. My camera person, my photographer at that point of time, never got the visa. In fact, the Afghan embassy was about to burn his passport. I mean, which was unfortunate. That's another story. But so I had my poor Mojo kit and myself. I said, okay, I'll do that. Then they said, Mr. Hikmatia doesn't believe in mobile phones, so forget about your Mojo kit. I said, then how will I do a YouTube video? Because we are multimedia journalists now, so you have to do YouTube. I said, okay, let me just go there and meet him, and we'll see. And the next morning, that was again 15th of August, that Sunday morning when things have. It was already under Taliban, and I reached there and I realized he has this fascinating studio which can beat any TV studio. He has 7 cameras and all the lights and everything was set up for me to just go and interview him. I'm like, wow. So, he knows how to be the man of the moment, and he was so soft spoken. And every time I was asking him a question, I was like, am I really speaking to the butcher of Kabul? Okay, but then, he took every questions head on. But then eventually we had to stop the interview there because the Taliban had come in, and at that time there was this risk that he might get killed. So, his men came and whisked him away. And how I came back to Sirina is another story for which you need to read the book.
Good time for audience questions. We'll do 2 very quick ones, right? So the first hand that I saw, the lady in yellow and black, please state your name, keep your question short, and we'll go immediately over to the next person. Then the gentleman in the white and yellow, and we'll have Nainima answer both of them at the same time.
Hi Nainima, I'm very inspired by your story, and I read this book called Cupcakes and Kalashnikovs, which is also a collection of women journalists and their essays. And basically this writer says that today I was baking cupcakes for my son and tomorrow I'm reporting about Kalashnikovs in Russia. So my question is around that, like when you are away and you're facing such perilous situations, how do you reconcile like what will happen back home? How do you deal with that fear of your family?
And you need to have a good husband for that if you're married.
Super. Yes, please.
So ma'am, India was one of the last embassies to withdraw from Kabul. So could you run us through what was happening in the embassy during that period? Was the embassy trying to establish some sort of back channels with Taliban? Or was it just an attempt to leave the embassy for good for a foreseeable future?
Well, the embassy was doing whatever they had to do at that point of time, but to tell you frankly, I think our embassy was also in evacuation mode. But then at that moment, they did whatever was good for them because the security was a big threat, and the Haqqani network had a lot of, we have a past with them. But then the point is what we did afterwards, and that is what I wrote in several of my articles. After coming back, we revoked the visas of Afghan students. We did not give visas even to some of the Afghan patients who were undergoing cancer treatments. And we changed everything into e-visas. Nobody got an e-visa. So, I think we need to revisit our Afghan policy. What is it that we want to do with the Afghanistan embassy in Delhi? They have the tricolor, but then we are dealing with the Taliban. We have MEA delegation going there almost every month. We don't know what is it that they are talking. If you really want to recognize them, look at what Russia is doing. If you don't, then at least let the Afghans come in. Not every Afghan is a Taliban.
From the great game of the 19th century to the present day, the unfortunate Afghans have lived under the specter of war. And Nainima Basu's delightful book is a celebration of the courage and the spirit and the resilience of the Afghans. Lise Doucette and Christina Lamb are supposedly household names in Afghanistan. At this year's Bangalore Literature Festival, let's make Nainima Basu a household name. Stop by at Ata Galata, pick up a copy of her brilliant book. I'm here up on stage because I'm proud of what she's done, and so should all of us. Big round of applause to our author, Nainima Basu, and thank you for being a great audience.